The Game Boy Advance. One of the last Nintendo consoles to focus primarily on pixel art sprite work, and along with RPGs, it is a console known for its excellent side-scrollers. This is a console due for a retrospective of its own, but today, I wanted to focus on the two Metroid games that were released for it. These two games were massively influential on the direction of the series in their own ways. Metroid Fusion carries on from the tense atmosphere of the previous games, creating horror through the soulless entity that pursues Samus throughout the game, and inspiring future games through its unique structure. Metroid Zero Mission, a remake of the first game, not only honors that game, but also creates such a distinct Metroid experience, learning from everything that came before it, and crafting something truly brilliant that can be played in so many different ways several times over. Originally, I was going to give these two games standalone videos, but I ended up combining my discussion of them into one big video, just as I did with Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. And while those two games ended up creating one big, cohesive video with points of comparison between both games' various aspects, this is essentially just two videos rolled into a big Metroid burrito, with a distinct thesis for each game. You can think of it like those Game Boy Advance double packs they used to put out, and you don't have to pay a cent. Imagine that. Really, I'm doing this because I wanted something substantial to tide people over while I work on my next big project. It's taking a long time to finish, and these games have been long overdue for a video, so I figured now was as good a time as any to analyze them. Anyway, without further ado, I'm Liam Triforce, and this is a Metroid Fusion and Metroid Zero Mission retrospective. If there was another version of you that lacked remorse or restraint, would you fear what you were capable of? Or perhaps, does that version of yourself exist within you in some form? To me, there is no feeling worse than being alone with yourself for an extended period of time. We are social creatures, we crave interaction with other humans. Being isolated for a long time can cause me to spiral, which is exactly why I am drawn to it in art. Metroid's atmosphere is so distinguished because Samus is almost always the only human exploring these planets, and the games do everything in their power to make that experience feel both desolate and beautiful. But Samus never falters. She is an empowering character that, despite being alone, powers through each and every time. Metroid Fusion is a game that explores that fear of loneliness further. Rather than just being alone with the self that only you know, the one that lives inside your head, it personifies that self through a relentless, remorseless version of Samus, forcing her to confront an all-powerful, homicidal version of herself when she is most vulnerable. With that said, there is a silver lining in this game's core concept through Samus's former commanding officer, Adam Malkovich. Under both an unsettling and hopeful lens, Metroid Fusion is designed to let you know that you are never alone. It also happens to be an awesome Metroid game, one that informed the future of the series in many ways. For context, Metroid was on hiatus for 8 years between Super Metroid and the dual release of Metroid Prime and Fusion. During that time, attempts were made to bring a successor to fruition, but to no avail. The Nintendo 64 did not inspire anything in Super Metroid director Yoshio Sakamoto, and he has gone on record stating that he couldn't imagine how Samus could control with a Nintendo 64 controller. An unknown developer declined an offer to create the next Metroid game as they didn't feel they could top Super Metroid. It wouldn't be until Retro Studios would be selected to develop a first-person Metroid game, and the casual announcement at Space World 2000 that a Metroid game would be coming to GameCube, that the Super Metroid team would reunite for another game. Former Retro Studios employee John Whitmore opined that this was the catalyst for Metroid Fusion's development, and the game would be confirmed by Nintendo in March of 2001. It would be known as simply Metroid 4 at E3 that year. Looking back at this period of Metroid Fusion's development is fun. At this point, the game we know had not coalesced at all. This was an extremely early prototype, shown off after what could have only been a few months of development, and I'm amazed that the team felt confident enough to show it off at E3. To contextualize this period in Metroid history, Metroid Prime at this point was not believed in by most Metroid fans. Many questioned whether the shift to first person would benefit Metroid, or if it would be a mere desecration of the formula that no one asked for. Meanwhile, Metroid 4 is shown off with a style of presentation resembling a Tiger Electronics game. It must have been a hell of a rough patch for Metroid fans back then. Thankfully, as we know, both games turned out just fine. More than just fine, in fact. In fairness, the footage probably looked a bit better in person, but I still would have been skeptical. That said, there are a few mechanics in these early builds that never made it into the final game, including one that I still haven't really seen a Metroid game utilize. There's the grapple beam for one thing, which didn't appear in Fusion at all, instead allowing Samus to climb horizontally like she's using monkey bars. But the real star of the show is this. What in the Super Mario Galaxy? If this had been implemented in the final game, it would have been way ahead of its time, predating games like Galaxy or V. I also can't think of very many games in this genre that use a mechanic like this, though I'm sure they exist. The possibilities for level design and secrets seem really exciting. Though you could scale platforms like this with the Spider Ball in Metroid 2, that limited you to your Morph Ball form, and you couldn't easily jump from one platform to the next. I imagine this was scrapped for a number of reasons, but the biggest was probably the camera not fully accommodating for this kind of platforming. The Game Boy Advance screen is at a strange aspect ratio. It's not 4:3 or 16:9, it's somewhere in between. And its size necessitates clarity rather than scope or detail, meaning that something like this probably wouldn't have been fun to use without being able to see more of the world. This is all conjecture, but this mechanic has interested me ever since I first saw it. The Spider Ball is fine, but this just feels more exciting, as it isn't nearly as slow, and it presumably allows Samus to use her other abilities while magnetized to walls and ceilings. Either way, the game ended up coming into its own by E3 2002, as did Metroid Prime, and the rest is history.
I'd been assigned to watch over the biologics research team. So once again, I found myself on the surface of SR-388. It was there that I was attacked by a life form I had never encountered before. It was only later that I learned the identity of my attacker, a parasitic organism we now know as X.
After being infected by the X parasite, Samus loses consciousness on the return trip, as the X infests her central nervous system and corrupts her power suit, spreading quickly and completely throughout her entire body. Things are looking grim, until, conveniently, someone finds a cure. This line might make me laugh, but to this game's credit, the reasoning for this plot point is cute. It doesn't make any sense that they were just able to use a Metroid cell to conveniently save Samus's life against this unknown parasite, but the cell culture that they preserved belonged to the baby Metroid. The one that Samus saved on SR-388, the one that was stolen from the lab by space pirates, and the one that ended up sacrificing itself for Samus at the end of Super Metroid. That notion is quite beautiful, and it's something that Samus reflects on.
As for me, one life ended, yet I survived, reborn as something different. Pondering this fact, I realize I owe the Metroid hatchling my life twice over.
While the X parasites may have been destroyed, she develops immunity to them thanks to the Metroid vaccine, while also essentially becoming part Metroid herself, meaning that she is weak to cold just as the Metroids were, and she cannot use her Ice Beam. I wonder if that has any significance in this game. This would be one of many ways Samus's journeys would mutate her DNA. So not only is she part Metroid right now, but she is also able to absorb countless X parasites without any issue. She has had Chozo in her DNA since childhood after being rescued and raised by them. She absorbs Phazon in the Prime series. Oh, and in Metroid Prime 4, she has psychokinetic powers. She's collecting genetic mutations like they're items and whatnot, which is actually pretty awesome. This plot point also acts as a game mechanic, as Samus's immunity to the X means she can absorb them to replenish her health and ammo. It also becomes apparent, however, that the X can mutate into and mimic other living creatures. And this elevates the mechanic from just being a diegetic way to implement replenishing items into something that you can experiment with. There are times where you'll need to absorb the floating parasites quickly so that they don't mutate into something else, while at the same time, there will be puzzles that require you to allow a parasite to mutate into different things across an entire room, so that you can gain access to a new area or an item. The X parasites are brilliant, adding an unknown factor into a game with an already anxious atmosphere, while also seamlessly bringing the narrative and gameplay into one, much like Samus as she absorbs one. Right away, Metroid Fusion makes itself apparent that its structure isn't like any previous Metroid game, as Metroid Fusion actually uses objective markers, at least to some extent. At the behest of this computerized commanding officer, Samus must gradually make her way through each sector of the Biologic Space Laboratory Station, downloading each of her abilities as authorized by the Federation, as well as from absorbing specific X parasites after defeating bosses. Each objective marked is a new ability to download, but when it comes to retrieving the next level of security clearance, you'll have to discover that room on your own. So there is absolutely still room for discovery, and that also goes without saying when talking about hidden missile tanks, energy tanks, and power bombs. This means that although navigation rooms print out the map for you immediately, there are still plenty of uncharted pathways for you to discover through clever usage of your abilities. Additionally, the game gradually opens up and expands its level design as you proceed. On the other hand, Metroid Fusion sadly doesn't feature any major sequence-breaking opportunities due to its heavy emphasis on storytelling. While your route through the previous games could vary heavily thanks to what was possible with Samus's core moveset, particularly in the original Metroid and Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion doesn't offer much of that. There is an incredibly long sequence of shine sparks that you can use to trigger a secret message in Sector 4, meaning that the design team saw that this was possible and accounted for it in a pretty entertaining way, with the Federation feeling eager to reveal their secret plan. But any other unforeseen attempt at a sequence break for a major upgrade has a safeguard in place. After absorbing the X parasite, the game will not give you the item. It will simply show you the last level of security clearance you've obtained, and that's it. As mentioned, this is due to the fact that the story has to occur in a specific way, including scripted sequences, which Metroid Fusion benefits from due to how well they are utilized. The main deck in Sector 1, as you'd expect, are fairly straightforward, but they also give you an objective that acclimates you to the game itself with the 4 atmospheric stabilizers. But just as you take the elevator down to Sector 1, a large explosion erupts above you. As the dust settles, Samus emerges. Continuing Super Metroid's excellent use of scripted sequences to convey story, create fear, and make the player a part of it all, Metroid Fusion introduces the SA-X, an X-parasite that has mimicked Samus at her most powerful, while Samus is under-equipped and vulnerable. Of course, at this moment, you aren't in control. It is merely introducing the concept to you, and it does so quite effectively. At first, you're confused as this doesn't look like the Samus we've gotten used to since the game began. She has her full power suit, while our Samus is supposed to be thinner with the organic layer of her suit exposed. But then it punches in and gives you this detailed shot of a disturbing, soulless, eyeless Samus, its visor illuminating the cognizant, yet husk-like gaze within its helmet. Then it walks over to the next door, and it doesn't just open it, it decimates it. For a Game Boy Advance game, this is a thoroughly creepy concept. It also parallels Samus's eradication of the Metroids on SR-388, as it exists solely to track down Samus, having been born from the X-parasite that lingered in the surgically removed portions of her power suit, and it feels like an embodiment of Samus's genocidal mission to kill all of the Metroids in the second game, coming back to haunt her. For a time, Samus was the predator, but now she is naught but prey. The SA-X is what makes Metroid Fusion the game that it is. In the same way that Ridley effortlessly mops the floor with you at the beginning of Super Metroid, it becomes clear that the SA-X is an insurmountable enemy. Upon entering Sector 2, the computer informs Samus of their then unknown saboteur's identity, telling her that she can't fight it, and that she should run. Its usage of the ice beam, coupled with the fact that Samus remains weak to ice as a result of the Metroid vaccine, means that she would be dead within seconds if spotted. The computer repeats itself. If you see it, just run. This is about where you are meant to realize that these sequences aren't meant to play out in a scripted manner as they were in Super Metroid. Though the SAX appears throughout your exploration, you can actually be noticed by it if you don't stay out of its way. And God help you if that happens. While all of this is occurring, the SAX's reign of destruction as it hunts you down will transform your exploration of each sector. Here's an example. After successfully timing and unloading your missiles into this giant condom, you'll come across a door that has crumbled and is inoperable. After figuring out where the hidden passage is, you'll plop down into this room with an overpass that you might have stumbled into earlier. Only this time, the SAX happens to be there. You can actually drop down and say hello if you don't value your skin, but if you do, your next instinct should be to run, just as the computer told you. But you can't. You came down from a one-way block. You are forced to wait, agonizing over whether or not the SAX will still be there when you are able to safely go through the door. Though it isn't, it has wrought havoc upon this sector. All organic life in that same vertical shaft has been reduced to husks. Husks that you can actually use as platforms, disturbingly enough. And multiple doors are inaccessible now. All of this is what I meant when I said that Fusion involves the player in its horror. And this is also where Fusion really stops holding your hand. Of course, you'll still have markers telling you where to go, and the map will be printed out each time. But the path is often unclear due to the SAX's intrusions and the hazards within each area, preventing access to the more obvious routes. Sector 4 has multiple hidden areas because of the electrified water, while most of Sector 3's doors have been demolished, meaning you'll have to have a good think with your existing arsenal. By the time you reach Sector 6, you'll be dealing with icy X-parasites that can freeze Samus as soon as she absorbs them, which really hurts, all in this dimly lit area that you pretty much have to solve yourself. It's probably one of the scariest areas to traverse, and finally reaching that lone energy tank feels so cathartic. At least until you descend a little further. At first you're just looking for the next passage, and you'll realize you need a power bomb. But as soon as you follow this tunnel to its end, the SAX emerges from behind you. You were so close to being discovered. The SAX drops a power bomb to clear the path for itself, and if you'd been following its path, you suddenly need to roll as fast as you can to avoid getting hit by the blast. Or worse, being seen by the SAX. Then, you once again have to wait until you feel safe enough to proceed. If it wasn't already apparent, the way the SAX appears is gradual and unpredictable. Though always scripted, you are forced to adapt in every scenario it appears, much like Mr. X in Resident Evil 2. Later on, after you've acquired the Varius suit, which allows you to absorb the icy X parasites, survive extreme temperatures, and most importantly, avoid being frozen, and immediately after you've obtained the power bomb, you'll come to this room that seems like a dead end, and you'll hear some familiar footsteps ring out from the entrance. That's another detail I love about the SAX. When it knows you're around, it just walks back and forth. It knows it will catch up to you eventually. It's in no rush. If you decide to hang out and wait for the SAX to leave once again here, you'll quickly realize that it has no intention of leaving. Instead, pacing back and forth, waiting for you to reveal yourself. You have to place a power bomb against the wall and time it just right so that— oh fuck. Yeah, the computer wasn't kidding, by the way. If you don't run, you will die. These encounters, coupled with the variety in each sector and the curveballs the game tends to throw your way, are why I don't mind Metroid Fusion's structure in the long run. It allows for a deliberate and constant atmosphere of uncertainty that permeates the entire game. It does have a pretty significant flaw that I will address later, but that flaw also heavily depends on how you like to play Metroid. The core experience of Metroid Fusion heavily benefits from this much more linear structure, restricting you for most of the game to make you feel more naked and defenseless throughout. and giving the SAX far more weight as an antagonist, as well as enhancing that feeling of being like a dog on a leash while following the computer's objectives. Speaking of which, it is only a matter of time before you might get a sense for the Federation's ulterior motives on this mission. Shortly before entering Sector 6, the computer gets a call from someone in the Federation, asking if Samus suspects anything. Cool, thanks for the subtle clue. Meanwhile, the SAX apparently hacks into the system control file, and the main boiler's cooling unit malfunctions, forcing you into a pretty awesome and nail-biting sequence where you rush back to Sector 3 and maneuver your way through an area that is actively trying to fight back against you. With crumbling platforms and enemies you need to freeze and use as footholds with ice missiles, another example of Metroid Fusion's uncertainty and ability to pivot on a dime. What I latched onto immediately, though, even before the sequence began, was the computer's dialogue regarding the SAX. It says, "What impressive intelligence." This is a recurring theme throughout the game. Earlier, the computer commented on the fact that it found the X fascinating, particularly the SAX. It's something I kept in the back of my mind as I proceeded through the rest of the game, and this is where Samus truly begins to break the chains that bind her. After the emergency in Sector 3, Samus heads up to the habitation deck after vital signs are detected there, and though there are no human survivors remaining, there are some familiar faces to be found. In an awesome callback to Super Metroid, the animals that Samus can save during the final escape sequence can be found here, and once you figure out a path and disengage the lock, they'll rush to her ship, recognizing Samus as their savior and protector, much like the baby Metroid once did. Again, diversions like these, especially in a game with a seemingly rigid structure, are what make it so special. Soon after, you'll be heading back to your ship as instructed, only for the elevator to shut down and for the entire station to lose power. You'll have to find a way to your ship on your own from there, and you'll stumble into a Sub-Zero containment room, only to be greeted by an old friend. This can't be. Ridley died in Super Metroid, didn't he? Well, an X-Parasite flies out of the frozen dragon, and he crumbles to the ground. Guess he wasn't really there after all, huh? This moment always stuck out to me, especially after the encounters with the SAX and the unpredictability of the game itself. I fully expected Ridley to breach containment there. But the game decides to throw you a bone. The tension is palpable, though. Anyway, after a fight with a giant spider named Yakuza, yeah, I'm not kidding, that's its name, you'll discover that the reason the reactor is blown is because of some overgrown vegetation. So you'll blast your way through most of it, hoping to find a solution, only to find a shortcut to Sector 2 that immediately takes a turn for the worst. By this point, you've had to hide from the SAX, you've had to escape from it, and you've had to slip past it. But before this point, you have always been able to avoid its line of sight somehow. This time, however, you have no choice but to run for your life. By this point, you'll be armed with the space jump and the ice missiles, so you can freeze it momentarily, but your space jump won't actually get you very far in this corridor, especially due to the low ceiling and the vegetation all over the place. This is a nightmare scenario, but you have to try. Just as each boss is an excellent way to test players not just on their skills and knowledge over their abilities, but also on how resourceful they have been in exploring for energy tanks and missiles, especially energy tanks. Encounters with the SAX, especially ones that go horribly wrong, teach you to truly value each and every item you've obtained. And now you are forced to face your greatest fear in order to survive. After a mad dash of placing power bombs and opening gates while dodging the SAX to the best of your ability, you'll finally reach a room with a wall that you can cower behind, allowing you to shake the SAX off your trail. The whole sequence is a chilling way to confront your worst fear, and while this is not the final encounter with the SAX, it is the last time you will have to truly worry about its presence during regular exploration. Congratulations. At this point, Samus crosses through shortcuts in various sectors with her new items. This is where the game becomes more open-ended and interconnected, coupled with the fact that you've probably realized by now that your computerized CO is not to be trusted. You can do some cleanup here, but you are still restricted to a specific portion of the game's map. And this is where I want to talk about the only real downside of this structure. And like I said, it depends on how you like to play Metroid. If you are the type that wants to collect everything before you finish the game, then Metroid Fusion can be a little frustrating. While the act of discovering items and solving problems with your arsenal in this game remains fun and satisfying throughout, the structure of Metroid Fusion adapts poorly to a 100% run. Because each area is segmented, you won't be able to fully complete them until you get the screw attack and are able to explore the entire facility at the very end of the game, which is cumbersome. Also, you can only reach each area through either the main deck elevators or specific tunnels you can find that connect you to the areas directly west or east of the area you're in at that moment. Plus, there are so many items to collect in Fusion. More than even in Super Metroid. More energy tanks for sure, up to 20, and also 32 power bomb tanks. Who the hell needs that many power bombs? They're a situational item as it is, and you're not going to be using them in boss fights much. Super Metroid circumvents any egregious backtracking by having players backtrack anyway for the sake of the objective, meaning that they can find other things along the way. It's not nearly as overwhelming, and the map layout isn't strictly horizontal, meaning that shortcuts can connect to each area rather cleanly. Due to the flat horizontal layout of Fusion, you can really only connect to each sector in a linear fashion, but that isn't nearly as much of a problem because there's a convenient elevator on the main deck. My real issue is with the structure of the game, essentially preventing you from doing a clean 100% run, leading to a catastrophic amount of backtracking if you want to perform some item cleanup. Oh, and as mentioned, Metroid Fusion doesn't have any major sequence breaks. You can get certain missile tanks and whatnot early, but that can only go so far when other items are locked behind late game upgrades, meaning you cannot obtain them until the final boss fight is imminent. Also, not only is the infinite bomb jump pretty much impossible to perform in this game, but the wall jump was nerfed pretty heavily, as Samus will now jump far away from the wall, meaning you can't chain wall jumps together anymore either. This kind of route through the game is an inevitability, and it leads to Metroid Fusion having a solid focus during its primary route, but being much less flexible when you attempt to bend the rules, like in other games in the series. This is why I understand to some extent why Metroid Fusion's linearity might be contentious to some people. Of course, backtracking is an inevitability in games with interconnected puzzle box level design like these ones. There's just no avoiding it, and that's why it's important to approach these games with a degree of patience for it, especially if you're one to grab everything in games. To compensate, though, these games always usually have ways of mitigating it. For example, I've already mentioned how Super Metroid was designed, but in my Metroid Prime retrospective, I discussed how Prime 2's overworld structure solved a big issue with Prime 1's areas being disconnected from each other, simply by having each area contain a shortcut to every other area. It's clean, and it allows you to create your own routes when looking for items you've missed. Metroid Fusion's design may mitigate backtracking along the main route, but it alienates all other playstyles due to its focus. Now, to Metroid Fusion's credit, its focus is incredibly strong for the reasons I've already outlined, and I feel it remains a stellar Metroid game, regardless of whether or not its 100% run is a bit irritating. Like it or not, Metroid Fusion wants you to play it a certain way, and everything it does is in service of that curated experience. And it works. Metroid Dread would later find a way to not only incorporate multiple playstyles and sequence breaks, but also focused horror-driven gameplay through Emmy. But that's a story for another time. The only other problem I have with Fusion isn't really a problem per se, but something I've always thought about after each playthrough is said and done, and it certainly helps make the game feel more memorable to me. I've always struggled with the fluctuating boss difficulty in Metroid Fusion, which, to be fair, lends itself well to its unpredictability. For example, the giant condom and the spider boss both feel like a decent challenge. They're both about timing and aiming your shots in tandem with your positioning, which is fine. Then there's the serpent-like boss that always gave me a hard time. Its pattern seems to have some rhyme or reason, but it moves so fast that I am always thrown off by it. I've died to it a few times in the past. Then there's this boss that feels reminiscent of Spore Spawn. Not Bot Wound like I said in my last video, this is Bot Wound. I can't believe I made that mistake. Anyway, I really have a hard time balancing this little room to move, with projectiles floating around and the laser that forces you to either jump or duck. Once I get into a rhythm, I can handle it, but finding that rhythm can be a nightmare. Speaking of which, Nightmare might be one of the hardest bosses in a 2D Metroid game, and not in an endearing way. It's just straight up brutal. First of all, you have the disorienting way it floats up and down at the beginning of the fight. This part isn't that bad, you just sneak in some pot shots while it's above you, but coupled with the lasers and the limited room to move, it can be annoying. The next phase, however, is where the shit hits the fan. First of all, you need to aim your missiles and beam shots at its face while it closes in on you, all the while firing lasers at you. If it gets too close or you get out of its way, it begins to drunkenly swerve all over the screen like a Medusa head from Castlevania that's had a little too much. You can somewhat lead it in a direction of your choosing, but sometimes trying to get it on your tail will end up forcing you to take a hit, and this thing hits hard. Either way, this is the pattern that you must settle into. If Nightmare's drunken swerving felt more consistent, then I don't think this boss would be as infamous as it is. It'd be tough, but manageable. This boss feels like a wild card sometimes. Anyway, with all of that said, let's wrap things up. At this point, Samus is operating on her own terms. She restores her plasma beam and obtains the diffusion missiles by herself, which is a really cool power-up, by the way, thanks to its area of effect. And she activates level 4 security clearance as well. The computer warns her to use more discretion. I've always felt that Samus had things figured out by this point. During exploration of a restricted area, Samus stumbles across a Metroid breeding program that the Federation has been running, and the SAX can be spotted trying to kill them all. This is where things start to make a lot more sense. Not only does it become apparent why the Federation has been withholding information from Samus, but the commentary the computer offered earlier on the emergency situation suddenly becomes clearer. The SAX ignored its sense of self-preservation to blow up the entire research station because of these Metroids. They are the only thing this species fears, and in the end, the SAX is devoured by them. From here you have to escape the restricted lab, and it self-destructs soon after. You'd assume that this would be the end for the SAX, much like Ripley assumed it was the end for the alien when the Nostromo exploded, but that ends up not being the case. Not only is Samus reprimanded for her actions, but she also learns that there are actually multiple SAX on the loose, having reproduced asexually through mitosis, and the Federation plans to use them, along with the Metroids and the X-Parasites, for military purposes, much to Samus's dismay. I've already discussed how the SAX parallels Samus's hunt for all of the remaining Metroids in Metroid 2, turning the tables on her in a clever way, but I also feel like the SAX parallels both the Xenomorph and Alien, which Ash calls a perfect organism, and the computer also reminds me heavily of Ash. Yeah, we're continuing the Alien comparisons in this video too. While the concept of the SAX and the X-Parasite in general are both more closely reminiscent of John Carpenter's The Thing, itself based on the 1938 novel Who Goes There, as both revolve around a strange alien life form that assimilates and imitates other things. But my thoughts once again turn to Alien. When Ash is asked how the surviving crew members can kill the Xenomorph, Ash simply responds, "You can't." Just as the computer did when attempting to warn Samus of the SAX's power. This is the crux of the horror in Metroid Fusion, of course, but the comparisons run deeper. Remember how I mentioned that the computer seemed to have a fascination with the X? That aspect seems to have been lifted directly from Ash, not just because Ash is serving as a double agent, but because they are both essentially robots that admire the relentless, remorseless qualities of the killers that both works revolve around. The SAX is a version of Samus that has no conscience, no remorse, no delusions of morality, as Ash said of the Xenomorph in Alien. This creature is what Samus would be if she lacked any human emotion or soul. This is what the Metroids saw on SR-388 in Metroid 2. This is what the space pirates saw at the beginning of Super Metroid. This is what she could be if she lacked a soul, much like this computer. Speaking of which, I've refrained from mentioning the nickname that Samus gives this computer throughout the game, but I wanted to save it until the time was right. One of Samus's earliest monologues in Fusion explains this further.
That computer reminds me of a gruff Federation CO I served under, named Adam Malkovich. He called me Lady on missions. From anyone else, it would have sounded sarcastic, but Adam made it sound dignified. Out of respect and with some irony, I named the computer after him.
She continues later on.
As I listened to the briefing, my thoughts turned to Adam. The real Adam understood me well. He would end orders by saying, "Any objections, lady?" He knew I wouldn't disagree. That was just his way of noting our trust. I wonder if I can trust this computer, too.
To Samus, Adam is her anchor on this mission. For the player, Adam is the one person that seems to be in your corner. Watching this computer slip away from Samus as you and her both begin to grasp the Federation's plans is disheartening. But it also comes at a time where you've been able to outsmart and flee from the SAX, as well as watch it crumble under the weight of all of the Metroids, proving that you are stronger than your fear. You don't need this dubious guidance anymore. Following this conversation, Samus delves further into the station and confronts her old friend once again, who now carries with him a funny scream. Most of this fight is just the same Ridley fight you know and love, just with him screaming over and over again to the point where you feel like the speakers are going to break. It's worth mentioning that even under the best circumstances, the Game Boy Advance's sound chip is pretty bad at playing back samples, which is why this god-awful scream is so memorable. It's why there are few soundtracks on the Game Boy Advance that truly take advantage of the hardware effectively. Just to visualize this for a second, this right here is every Game Boy Advance soundtrack, and way above them is Mother 3. Okay, maybe I'd place a few soundtracks in between these two things, and I still haven't played Golden Sun or Wario Land 4, but Mother 3 is in the upper echelon of video game soundtracks, and not just because of the rhythm-based combat. I'd say Metroid Fusion is slightly above the rest of them though, thanks to its subdued use of melody instead focusing on atmosphere and crunchy sound effects. Kenji Yamamoto specifically instructed Minako Hamano to do this, both likely due to the hardware's limitations, and because hearing repetitive melodies while exploring the research station for extended periods of time would likely become grating after a while. That didn't save us from the screaming, though. As it turns out, Ridley was just being mimicked by another ex-parasite. Guess he really was dead after all. Even so, it's a novel way to write Samus's arch-nemesis into the game. Once Samus returns to the navigation room, she is instructed to leave things to the Federation, and Samus finally puts her foot down in protest against this nonsense. The Federation is walking into a death trap, and it poses a massive threat to civilization. Samus intends to blow this research station to pieces, eliminating all of the X and preventing anyone from ever being infected by them again, even if that means her own destruction as well. But in her anger, she lets her nickname for the computer slip out. Samus reveals that Adam gave his life to protect her, a notion that this computer does not seem to understand, dismissing Adam's sacrifice entirely until something changes. Out of nowhere, the computer has a change of heart. Or perhaps, of mind. A surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. It is revealed in the game's ending that Adam's mind had been uploaded and preserved after death to a computer, and Samus using his name must have jogged his memory. At least that's how I interpreted it. It's a bit of a deus ex machina, but I warmed up to it due to how influential Adam seemed to be on Samus. More on that in a bit. From here, all Samus has to do is initiate the self-destruct sequence, and it's here where you'll finally be able to face off against the SAX. This should go without saying, but after stomaching the atmosphere of uncertainty that this thing creates throughout the whole game, it is extremely cathartic to be able to predict its movements and destroy it once and for all. After all, it is mere mimicry of your abilities, without soul or conscience, and who knows you better than you yourself? From there, you'll activate the sequence and escape to your ship, only to be attacked by an Omega Metroid, who also has a funny scream. The SA-X is also completely demolished by this thing, upon which Samus absorbs the parasite and becomes strong enough to fight back, much like when the baby Metroid gave Samus its energy in Super Metroid. Looking back, I didn't find either of these fights to be terribly difficult, especially compared to Nightmare and Ridley, meaning that a 100% run of this game is not really on my priority list for any future revisits to the Metroid series. Thankfully, the SA-X fight thrives on its uniqueness and context, while the Omega Metroid fight thrives on the tension of that time limit looming over you. Even after the thing goes down, you might still be kind of panicky, because your ship still isn't anywhere to be found. It flies in after a while, upon which you can finally make your escape. The ending of Metroid Fusion places Samus in a difficult position in the eyes of the galaxy. She actively betrayed the Federation's wishes by destroying that research station. As far as everyone else is concerned, she is the enemy here, destroying Federation property and fleeing the scene. I interpreted her thoughts here as the public seeing no difference between her and the soulless husk that followed her throughout the station. Samus's monologue puts things into perspective, thanks to a nugget of wisdom from Adam Malkovich.
Adam understood this, and he spoke to me in my anger. Do not worry. One of them will understand. One of them must. I've reflected upon his words, and I see the wisdom in them. We are all bound by our experiences. They are the limits of our consciousness. But in the end, the human soul will ever reach for the truth. This is what Adam taught me.
No matter what people might think of you, as long as you know who you are and what you believe in, then you can carry on, just as Samus does. The SA-X may be a reflection of what she is capable of, but it is not her. And if she believes that, and Adam would have believed that, then chances are, someone out there will believe her too. And that speaks to the complex yet resilient nature of the human soul. This is what I meant when I said that, for better or worse, you are never alone. At first it was because Samus was being stalked by this monstrous version of herself, but in the end, it was because she had Adam in her corner. And if Samus needed any more proof of her good nature, Adam reminds her by telling her that he had a little help starting the ship from those animals she once saved. Though I guess she could have also just left them to die in Super Metroid. Despite my problems with the game's structure, I still think Metroid Fusion is an absolutely stellar experience, carrying on from the horror-inspired roots of the series and reflecting Samus's past actions in an ingeniously terrifying way, all while creating a unique framework for Metroid to operate in, one that is consistently taken advantage of to elicit fear and anxiety in the player. I admire its concept and execution enough to appreciate it as a distinct, unsettling entry in the Metroid series.
Planet Zebes. I called this place home once, in peaceful times, long before evil haunted the caverns below. Now I shall finally tell the tale of my first battle here. My so-called Zero mission.
This might not surprise you considering my track record of disparaging remakes and remasters, but I am quite picky about playing those versions of games over the originals. I have nothing against them really, but from my personal experience, I can be a bit of a purist. To dredge up a past conversation from years ago on this channel, my love of The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker also encompasses its perceived flaws. as I've been able to adapt and operate around those flaws to appreciate the game even more. The original version of the infamous Triforce chart quest, though requiring a steep amount of rupees, gave me an excuse to explore the Great Sea to the fullest, highlighting my favorite aspect of the game, the exploration, after the team had to cut 2 whole dungeons due to time constraints. I also heavily prefer the bold colors and edgeless style of the original game. Wind Waker HD's bloom-heavy lighting engine, while beautiful in its own way, isn't entirely faithful to what I love about Wind Waker's art style. It also often tends to reveal the vertex lighting underneath the cell shading in certain lighting setups, completely destroying the original art style and making the characters look like plasticine figures. I even prefer the original North American GameCube item placements. Yes, they are different between versions, and yes, I'm that petty about this game. That being said, remakes can not only be a welcome way of reintroducing something to a new audience, but also an excellent way of rebuilding, reinterpreting, and reimagining the original work in a new context, all while remaining faithful to that work, provided that the original is still easily accessible. All of this is why I love Metroid Zero Mission. It not only remains incredibly faithful to the original game in design and atmosphere, but it also reinterprets those things through the advancements made in Metroid games since. It recontextualizes Samus's journey through her connection to the Chozo, and to top it all off, the original game is included on the cartridge as a bonus, so you don't have to play one or the other. It takes the original game and transforms it into something different yet familiar. And that is exactly my kind of remake. Metroid Zero Mission would be the last game developed by Nintendo Research and Development Division 1, as they would be merged into Nintendo SPD during Zero Mission's development, which would later be merged into Nintendo EPD. Contrary to what Nintendo often wants you to think, Nintendo games are not simply developed by Nintendo, the corporation. While Nintendo EAD was making Mario and Zelda, when Nintendo R&D 1 was around, they were known for developing Kid Icarus, Wario Land, Famicom Detective Club, the Game Boy console itself, and most importantly, Metroid. The team developed the original Metroid, Metroid 2, Super Metroid, and Metroid Fusion. They'd been with the series since inception, and Zero Mission would be their last game in which they were the lead developer. And what a beautiful send-off it was. A revisitation of Metroid's debut, while also being one of my personal favorites for how it moves the series' gameplay forward. From the moment you gain control of Samus and Brinstar, it feels familiar, yet distinct. The Morph Ball upgrade is to your left, and as you head right, it all feels exactly as it did in the original Metroid. Not to mention, the arrangement of the classic Brinstar theme sounds exactly as I imagined it would sound if it left the limitations of the NES. With the drums and the accompanying choir, both incredibly empowering and infectiously catchy. Soon, however, you'll notice that Samus's controls for jumping and shooting are far tighter and more fluid. In fact, they just might be even better than Super Metroid's controls. They might be, don't fight me. Her wall jump is as it was in Super Metroid, her speed is just right, and her regular jumps are incredibly responsive. It also becomes clear that Zero Mission's design is far more focused than the original, demonstrating the lessons learned from the previous games while also preserving the general vibe of each area. Brinstar still has those vertical tunnels that connect to a few upgrades in the entrance to Torian. Kraid's lair still asks you to descend through its spiraling layout. Norfair's dizzying sense of scale is still there, and Ridley's lair still has those agonizing stretches that you have to survive to reach Ridley. But in contrast with the original game, there aren't any tunnels that lead absolutely nowhere, or areas that go on for way too long, only for a single missile tank to be there at the end, or nothing at all. Most importantly, rooms no longer look identical. They all have a distinct purpose, and there are secrets everywhere that connect them together. It is a fully realized Metroid game, using the original game's atmosphere and design as a blueprint, and it is so much fun to play because of that. And through it all, the music is just as awesome as it ever was, with each arrangement beautifully realizing the atmosphere of each area without it ever feeling grating. Kraid's music is still catchy yet daunting, Norfair's music is still moody and atmospheric, and Ridley's lair is maddening once again, but in a much more digestible way thanks to the samples they used. This is merely the tip of the iceberg though. As you'd expect, the objective of Zero Mission is the same as it was in the original game. Defeat Kraid and Ridley, and move on to Torian to fight Mother Brain. What makes this journey so unique is not just the fact that the innovations from other Metroid games have been carried over, but also the fact that the game is a complete sandbox for you to play however you like. On one hand, the game has Chozo statues strewn about so that you can be directed toward important upgrades, so if you've never played this game before, or any Metroid game for that matter, you'll have guideposts along the way. It's not as straightforward as Metroid Fusion can be, so getting lost is still a very real possibility, but it feels like the perfect balance for any player needing a bit of guidance, and the statues refill your health and ammo too. On the other hand, you don't need to activate them in order for a series of events to take place like in Metroid Fusion. If you know where each item is, you can go after them as soon as possible. And this is where the true beauty of Zero Mission unravels itself. Immediately, the game directs you toward the long beam, as several paths require it along the way. You're meant to notice them, acquire the long beam, and realize what can be done. Alternatively, you can find a different path and head straight for the first missile tank, ignoring the long beam entirely, which is actually the same as NES Metroid, but with more deliberate level design that most likely won't have new players missing out on it by getting lost in a giant maze. Another example? The Varia suit. You need it in order to survive extreme temperatures, but you don't need it to complete the game. You can skip the Varia suit entirely, at least until you obtain the gravity suit later on, which grants you the Varia suit's effects anyway. Additionally, if you decide that you want it early, you can get it before you obtain the ice beam by using bomb jumps. Believe it or not, the game accounts for this, as if you grab it before you head to Norfair for the first time, Samus will actually be shown with the Varia suit instead. Even the most ridiculous of techniques are possible and accounted for here. Zero Mission introduces the ball spark technique, and with a very precise series of ball sparks, you can obtain the super missiles early. Naturally, this means you can open new doors and obtain more super missiles, allowing you to completely decimate bosses. Ridley did not stand a chance here, even with his funny scream attempting to distract me. From the new and improved wall jump that keeps you close to the wall as it did in Super Metroid, to the extremely lenient bomb jumping, Metroid Zero Mission can be played in so many different ways. The only firm gates are doors and paths that require specific items, and if you can play around them, then you can keep on going. To prove just how malleable this game can be, I decided to sequence break as much as I could in a playthrough that I have dubbed the Rancid Route, because it is genuinely disgusting. First of all, I skipped the Varia suit, but things were alright otherwise. Missiles, ice beam, and the power grip, which allowed me to hang off ledges. Then I arrived at this vertical shaft in Norfair. This right here began the downfall of my playthrough, because I somehow managed to finagle my way onto this enemy and through this missile block in the wall. I then proceeded to make my way through this series of vertical tunnels the wrong way. I'd bomb jump, wall jump, I'd do whatever I had to in order to push forward. I ended up fighting Kirugiru, a new boss added for Zero Mission specifically, incredibly early, all without the high jump boots. Yeah, I managed to skip those as well. To be fair, if you know how to bomb jump and wall jump well, you don't really need them, but this boss is rather unforgiving without that upgrade. Either way, it fell through the floor, and I managed to enter Ridley's lair, all without even touching Kraid's lair. I fought Ridley first on this route, and yeah, it was tough. I was under-equipped, but it was so much fun. And believe it or not, it's actually pretty efficient to go to Ridley's lair first, as Norfair is the only way to reach that area, and because I fought Ridley before Kraid, poor Kraid didn't last very long. The Rancid route eventually ended when I accidentally went to Torian without acquiring the wave beam. Sure, I had the Ice Beam in order to freeze the Metroids, but when multiple Metroids are on screen, and I have no way of piercing through walls and other enemies, I was swiftly and easily overwhelmed. You can, in theory, complete Torian without it, but I was too annoyed with the Metroids here to even try. Thankfully, it was pretty easy to just go back and grab the Wave Beam, but it was around here where I decided to just re-record the whole game the next day, as I'd broken the game in half just to prove a point, and it wasn't the most usable footage. Also, I'd taken far too long trying different things in order to obtain the ending I wanted, so I decided to just do a 100% run next time. Funnily enough, on that playthrough, I told myself that I was done with sequence breaking, but as soon as I caught a whiff of a possible early super missile with those ball sparks, it was over for me. And that's why Ridley went down so fast. I can't help it, this game is so much fun. The Rancid route was still a valuable lesson in just how non-linear Metroid Zero Mission can be. And to this day, I'm still discovering things. On release, it was criticized for its short length, but if you ask me, it was the perfect length for me to replay it over and over again, breaking it in new ways each time. And of course, you will never find yourself soft-locked through your experimentation. To accentuate this point further, carrying on from the Japanese version of Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission has a different ending for obtaining as few items as possible. Technically, every Metroid game has a low % run just through self-imposed challenges, but the Japanese version of Fusion would be the first game to reward you for it, complete with different endings. The only way to obtain this on a North American cartridge is by transferring your save data from Metroid Fusion to Metroid Zero Mission using a Game Link cable. Believe it or not, this was the first time I ever did this between two Game Boy Advance systems. I didn't start trading Pokemon until the DS came along, and yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, unlike Fusion, where the items you avoid are all optional upgrades like energy tanks, missiles, and power bombs, Zero Mission allows you to sequence break in order to avoid major upgrades to Samus's kit, as I've said. Currently, Metroid Zero Mission's lowest item percentage sits at 9%, at least without things like memory corruption. And because the ending is obtained through a percentage of 15% or lower, you can actually grab a few extra items to help yourself out. The 9% run only obtains the Morph Ball, a single missile tank, bombs, the 3 unknown items, the Power Grip, and the Ice Beam. This whole category serves as a testament to Zero Mission's non-linearity. You can find alternate routes around Chozo statues and plant-eating bugs everywhere. It feels like the culmination of everything the team had learned working on these games. Every single playthrough feels like a fresh experience, and a chance to learn something new. Since nearly all of the rooms in Zero Mission are completely original, designed to puzzle and reward players with abilities from other Metroid games, and it does so brilliantly at that, and as I alluded to with Kirugiro, Zero Mission is not one-to-one with the original Metroid in terms of design and pacing. There are still plenty of surprises throughout the game, like this slug boss that you need to push along to traverse through a tight squeeze, or this scorpion boss that emerges after you collect your first missile tank. I always thought of it as a pop quiz on how to play the game, as you have to survive, fire away at its eye, and shoot its thorns to collect resources. Its surprises extend to the narrative too, as things are not as straightforward as they might seem at first glance. At one point, you can diverge from the main path to collect an unknown item in Crateria, complete with an ominous sound effect. There are 3 of these in Zero Mission, and each of them hold a distinct purpose. That purpose is not revealed until much later, after you think you might have won against Mother Brain. The fight is one-to-one with the original game, and it is just as intense. Samus evacuates, and this is where Zero Mission veers off course from the original game, as Samus is shot down while escaping and lands in Chozodia. As an aside, the comic book influence the cutscenes demonstrate in this game is so much fun to look at. I am a particularly massive fan of detailed pixel art, and the Game Boy Advance and DS felt like the last bastion of big developers and publishers, particularly Nintendo, putting their all into fully pixel-based graphics. Independent games gladly carried the torch, of course, but I will forever miss Nintendo's pixel art. It's been a core part of their identity since their arcade days, after all. And with games like Yoshi's Island, They've continually demonstrated that not only are their artists some of the best in the medium, but they can also innovate stylistically with pixel-based graphics. There's still a lot to be done with pixel art. Both Fusion and Zero Mission have some gorgeous art and animation, both through their comic book influences and their detailed, almost disgusting portrayal of the environments Samus goes through. Outside of Zero Mission's cutscenes, there's also the animation for bosses like Kraid, with the way he opens his mouth when shot, as well as Mother Brain's undulating minute movements giving me such a visceral, upset reaction. It's all gorgeous. Anyway, the rest of the game focuses a bit on Samus's backstory, as well as introducing her Zero Suit, and all of its features. I'd criticized this shot as being gratuitous, but other M's showed me just how bad it can get for Samus, both through demeaning cinematography and poor characterization, so I'll shut my mouth until we get to that game. Chances are that more people have seen her wearing this suit than have actually played a Metroid game. All I'm gonna say is, if it actually gets these people to play these games and appreciate Samus as a character beyond her physical appearance, then I'd say it was a successful endeavor. Gratuitous butt shot aside, this suit was designed for a specific purpose. Much like Ripley at the end of Alien, this sequence was meant to make Samus feel vulnerable, illustrated by the fact that she is basically in her underwear, as was Ripley. Yoshio Sakamoto echoed this sentiment in an interview, quote, "We thought the image of the armorless Samus, completely defenseless, would excite players and make her situation feel real and threatening. It's like a scene out of a classic horror movie, an ugly, evil beast giving chase to its prey, whose weakness has now been exposed. I think being direct like that is the most effective way to raise the tension." Well, it certainly did excite players. Then again, I'm sure some people said the same about Sigourney Weaver in that scene in Alien. The point is, the Zero Suit wasn't just introduced for the sake of being arousing, although I'm sure that played a part in its creation, I won't refute that. Anyway, this sequence is pretty cool for a couple of reasons. After so much exploration on Zebes, you are stripped of everything you've collected with the exception of all of your energy tanks, and you are forced to play it safe and remain stealthy to avoid confrontation, as the space pirates in Chozodia will damage you for a full energy tank if they hit you. Vulnerable indeed. Your only line of defense is your blaster, a fully charged shot of which will briefly stun space pirates. That's all you get. Otherwise, it's an incredibly tense chase through the colossal, labyrinthine layout of the pirate base and Chozodia. This sequence always stuck out to me for how its difficulty is determined not just by how well you are able to avoid the space pirates, but also for how every energy tank you manage to unearth on Zebes directly affects how lenient this segment will be. It is both an excellent challenge and an effective reward. If you manage to survive long enough, you'll eventually reach a portion of Chozodia that has no space pirates and a distinctive shift in atmosphere. This is where we finally get an in-universe glimpse into Samus being raised by the Chozo, something that was alluded to in the Japanese version of Metroid Fusion, as well as various supplementary material over the years. While Chozo statues have been in virtually every Metroid game since, only Metroid Fusion would give us a glimpse into Samus's connection to the Chozo through the Japanese version's unlockable endings, showing us a few images of her growing up in Chozodia in different stages of her life. This was also included because at the time, a Metroid manga had begun serialization detailing Samus's childhood. Though it can be inconsistent with the games, it is generally seen as canon accompaniment, due to the fact that it contains details like Ridley killing Samus's parents, and her childhood with the Chozo, the former detail having never been explored in the games prior. It explains why the two seem to have such a long-standing rivalry, aside from the fact that this asshole just loves to keep coming back. It also recontextualizes a few things. Her protectiveness over the baby Metroid parallels how Samus lost her mother in the manga. As such, Samus likely would have given her own life for the sake of that child, just as her mother in the Chozo did for her. It explains why she was more than willing to sacrifice herself to destroy the research station in Fusion. Her childhood has transformed her into a protector of the universe, an unstoppable warrior. Of course, this brings her title of bounty hunter even further into question, which is why Nintendo later admitted, yeah, we don't know what that even means. instead describing her as altruistic and motherly, which I think is much more accurate to who she is. Regardless, after you manage to complete the test, only firing when the symbol appears so as not to hurt yourself, you will not only reacquire all of your upgrades, but those unknown items will be revealed as the plasma beam, gravity suit, and space jump. Does this mean that they were unable to figure out how to fit these upgrades into the main game? Sort of. I mean, they have use in Chozodia here, but that's it. I don't mind though. Either way, it contributes to an incredible victory lap around Chozodia, in which Brinstar's theme returns, sounding even more empowering than it did before, as you effortlessly blast away space pirates and explore for any remaining upgrades. So much fun. From here you can head straight to the final boss, fight Mecha Ridley, and be done with your playthrough. The boss can be incredibly punishing if you aren't precise with your movements, as he hits like a truck. But that seems fair for a game that rewards you for having as much health as you can find, and tests you on your movements so often throughout the game through either environmental puzzles or the whole Chozodia sequence. It's a great boss. That said, you could also clean up any remaining items to obtain 100% completion, depending on how you like to play Metroid once again. Unlike Fusion, you can obtain every single item in Zebes without these late game upgrades in one fell swoop if you know where they are. I initially thought that you might need the space jump for a particularly difficult room full of crumbling blocks, but as it turns out, I just sucked at the game. The only area you need your full suit for is Chozodia, which just makes sense. Chozodia is massive, by the way, so that victory lap could very well turn into its own little marathon. It's here where my only real issue with Metroid Zero Mission makes itself apparent, and why I don't tend to complete 100% runs of this game as often as Super Metroid. This game has some absolutely diabolical shine sparks. There's the infamous one in Chozodia that requires you to charge your shine spark between multiple rooms on ramps, but there are plenty of them throughout the game that require just as much planning to pull off. The hardest one for me was the mid-air shine spark that you have to pull off with extremely precise timing in order to avoid lasers that close off the energy tank at the end. You can do this with the space jump, but it is infinitely harder. If you so much as graze one of these lasers, you have to kill the space pirates, exit the room, and start the whole process over again. In a sadistic way, I guess I kind of enjoy these shine sparks, as they are not only fun puzzles on their own, but they feel like the ultimate test of your knowledge over the speed booster and your ability to control Samus. But they also test you on an ability that is usually situational, and I can't for the life of me figure out how people solved these on their own, especially the infamous Chozodia shine spark. Well, I guess I can chalk it up to trial and error. Most of my final playtime on this run was inflated by attempts at the shine sparks, and backtracking through Chozodia. I've said my piece about Fusion, but at the very least, its shine sparks weren't nearly as bad. The only one that got that difficult was the secret message, which isn't even necessary for any run of the game, and I guess whoever found out that was possible in testing decided to actually make it mandatory 2 years later in the Zero Mission 100% run. Several times over. That, as well as my love of Super Metroid's detailed, skin-crawling atmosphere, and its beautiful story told through gameplay, just barely push Zero Mission away from being my favorite game in the series. It is so close to being my favorite Metroid game, but those minor little points of contention I have keep Super Metroid the prime candidate in my mind. However, Metroid Dread also came pretty close to dethroning it, and I haven't played that game in a while. I wonder how that's going to shake out when I get around to the video. Even with that said, Chozodia's structure gives players freedom. It complements what I've said about Zero Mission being playable in so many different ways. It is absolutely mind-blowing just how good it is at enabling this. I feel like saying Zero Mission is close to being my favorite Metroid is a high honor to bestow, especially in a series full of excellent games. In many ways, Metroid Zero Mission is the essence of Metroid. It embodies everything that makes Metroid fun to play, from its monumental possibilities for routes, player freedom and experimentation, to its rock-solid controls, to its reinterpretation of the original Metroid, carrying not just that game's spirit, but also designing great environmental puzzles through their experience with the other Metroid games. a much tighter and more succinct and enjoyable layout, and its added abilities just make its gameplay loop so much more engrossing. On top of that, its atmosphere is still solid, taking cues from what made the original Metroid's atmosphere so great. Even if it doesn't entirely feel as hopeless, it is a lot more fun to play. This game is an easy recommendation to anyone that has never played a Metroid game. Its guideposts make it more accessible than the others, as well as its feature parity with Super Metroid and Fusion, but it isn't as straightforward as Fusion. Plus, it doesn't take place so late in the timeline that players won't understand what's going on. Zero Mission is a remake of the first game after all. Everything about it just feels perfect for first-time players. Plus, it is endlessly replayable thanks to its possibilities for routes, the things you'll learn each time, the new items you'll unearth, and the endings you can unlock for the gallery. In fact, after this video is done, I might just play it again, just to see if I can complete a low percent run. This is not just a great remake of a classic, it is an essential game for anyone that wants to get into Metroid or enjoys action, exploration, problem solving, and emergent solutions in their games. As a send-off from the original R&D 1 team, it is simply breathtaking, and I salute them for establishing Samus as a character and the Metroid framework as we know it. Thank you so much for the art you put out into the world, and for the memories I was able to make. There you go. 2 Metroid videos for the price of 1. To be honest, these were much simpler scripts to write compared to the last Metroid video I made, or some of my massive feature-length works, but I struggled so much to get them over the finish line. It wasn't because I was having a hard time writing about the games. It was because I kept feeling like they weren't enough. I felt like I had to tie these games to an emotional core. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a video worth making. A story worth telling. I couldn't accept that. Everything I make could not be any less than perfect. But then I played these games again. And I remembered that I replay them over and over simply because they make me happy. Like most things I've discussed on this channel, they are an escape. I began writing these videos to escape. That escape is now a career, which explains why I am putting so much pressure on myself to deliver. Writing about these games reminded me of why I am doing this in the first place. To write about the things I love. It sounds so plainly obvious when I put it like that, but you'd be surprised how easy it is to lose sight of that when your escape becomes a career. Frankly, I've been sitting here for 2 hours completely stumped on writing for this video. As of writing this, the Zero Mission part isn't done yet. But after hashing out this conclusion, I have no doubt that I'll be able to go back and finish it. If you're an artist, create exactly what you want to create without any compromises. Even if you feel this immense pressure to outdo yourself each and every time, just enjoy the process and express an idea without worrying about how it will be perceived. Listen to yourself. Do it for you. Not the you that everyone else sees. The you that only you know. Hope you enjoyed that Metroid burrito. One last thing before I sign off. This video's sponsor is very much unlike any of the ones I've featured, in that using it is completely free, and it could be a huge benefit not just to you, but to the world we live in. 80,000 Hours is a non-profit organization that aims to help people find careers, and more specifically, aims to convey how you can leave a positive impact with yours. The name 80,000 Hours comes from the time one spends on an average career, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year for 40 years. And its aim is to help people spend that time meaningfully, rather than just going through the motions day after day, which is a mission that resonates with me. It is home to concrete, practical advice for those seeking opportunities. It's easy to say follow your passion, but it can be difficult to pin down your passions as a career. Everything 80,000 Hours publishes is based on careful reviewing of data, opinions and consultations from experts, and other hard-hitting evidence, allowing them to help you answer any key questions you might have when it comes to finding your career, and genuinely following that passion. They have an in-depth career guide to help you make an informed decision, as well as a curated job board that is updated frequently with hundreds of job postings, and you can sort the job board by location, role, job requirements, and what field you want to work in. They even offer free one-on-one consultations with their advisory team, as well as detailed podcast episodes discussing the most pressing issues our world is facing. Once again, everything 80,000 Hours provides is completely free, as all their work is dedicated to helping people find their career paths and leave their positive mark on the world. If you'd like to get started on planning a career with 80,000 Hours and work to solve the world's most pressing problems in a field you're passionate about, sign up now at 80000hours.org/Liam Triforce. In doing so, you'll also receive a free copy of their in-depth, research-driven career guide in your inbox. With all of that said, I've been Liam Triforce. Thanks for watching.